All right, here is our first lesson for Unit 3, and we're going to talk about generalist versus specialist species, which I hope this mental image kind of stays with you because this is kind of what I think when I think of these kinds of species. So, first, let's talk about what a generalist species is. These types of organisms tend to have broad niches, and if you do not remember, a niche is basically your role in the ecosystem. What you eat, who you're eaten by, where you live, what your resources are that you need. And so generalist species tend to have very non-specific requirements. They're kind of chill, they can live wherever. So they can survive under a variety of conditions like this raccoon here. Raccoons are probably most native to forest ecosystems, but they're able to adapt fairly well. So raccoons have actually become very common in cities. You probably have run across one in your backyard at some point, or you may have, because they are very adaptable and they can live under a wide variety of conditions. They can also use multiple different types of food sources. So another example of a generalist here is a rat. This is the famous picture of Pizza Rat, who was dragging a piece of pizza down some subway stairs in New York City. And generalists can use a lot of different types of food. They're not super picky. They also can often reproduce very quickly. They don't have very long periods of time before they're able to reproduce. So they're born, they mature quickly, and they're able to reproduce, which makes them something called an R-selected species, which we'll talk about in our next set of notes. And some examples of them, I think of the three R's: rodents, roaches, raccoons, but these are not by any means the only types of generalist species. In general, if it can survive under a lot of conditions, it's a generalist. So this is something we should talk about with an eye to what kinds of habitats these organisms can live in. So generalists adapt more easily to changing habitats. If the habitat changes for whatever reason or another, they don't tend to die out quickly. They can survive during relatively rapid changes of environmental conditions, including those that happen during early successional communities. So in primary or secondary succession, a lot of the organisms that you're going to have there are going to be generalists. Examples, they are often pioneer species because they can live under a wide variety of conditions. However, the converse to this is that they can very easily become invasive species when you introduce them into a new ecosystem. And we'll be talking in the next couple of lessons about invasive species a couple of times. So let's look at an example of an invasive species. This lovely creature right here is a cane toad. It has become an invasive species in parts of the world, including Australia. So, what is an invasive species? It's an organism that's not native to an ecosystem, and it generally causes harm to either the environment, the economy in an area, or human health as well. Cane toads, for example, outcompete native species that harms the environment. They can eat crops and plants that can harm the economy, and they actually can shoot venom from like their face, and it can hit people in the eyes, and they've blinded people before. They're nasty little packages. Actually, they're not even that little. So cane toads were native to Central and South America, and people, in a very unwise move, ended up introducing them to Australia. I'm not going to go into the reasons for that, but if you are interested, ask me in class, and I can recommend some videos that tell you just how strange this situation is. But these guys are generalists. They have a super broad niche. If you look at the list of things they can eat, which I'm not going to go over because it's very long, they can eat a lot of different things. So they are not limited to one specific food source. This becomes a problem because they can go wherever and they can find something to eat. If you look at this map of Australia, the red area is the cane toad, the area of Australia where cane toads live as of 2021. And just within 9 years or so, they're projected to expand to almost half the continent. They're kind of taken over, and a lot of different methods have been tried to get rid of them that have not been successful. We'll talk more about invasive species and some different examples of invasive species and what can be done about them in Unit 9. Specialist species, on the other hand, tend to have a lot of the opposite characteristics from generalists. They have narrow niches. They have very specific requirements. They may need to live in a, particular set of temperature conditions, or they may have particular watering requirements if they're plants, or they may eat a very specific food source. So they tend to be what you might think of as the picky eaters. A lot of them are herbivores, they're not omnivores. So our other example that besides the one that we're going to talk about on the next slide are koala bears, which aren't technically bears, but koalas are a type of mammal that are native to Australia, and they only eat eucalyptus trees. That is it. In fact, I have read that some of them will spend their lives eating only from a couple of different eucalyptus trees. They are super specialists. That comes with its own vulnerabilities, though, because their populations tend to grow slowly and they need very specific environments, which means that if those environments change, they're sorry out of luck. So some examples, pandas, which we'll talk about on the next slide, Venus flytraps, which are an example of a specialist plant species, and koalas as well. So these organisms that are specialists tend to be successful mostly in habitats that stay constant. So if you have a habitat that hasn't changed for the past several hundred or several thousand years, you'll probably have a lot of different specialists taking advantage of these very narrow niches that they tend to develop. However, and this is because they tend to have a long period of time to adapt to their environment. Adaptation takes many, many generations. And so, after all of this long period of time, they're adapted to or specialized for their specific environments. And they also can develop really complicated relationships with other species. They might be involved in a couple of mutualisms, maybe a few commensalisms, and have specific competitions that will help kind of narrow their niche up. And they tend to be found not so much in early successional communities, they tend to be found in climax communities that have been around for a while. Unfortunately, this makes them vulnerable to extinction because they don't adapt or change very well. Adaptation, like I said, takes time. It takes generations. It can take thousands of years. And species that don't adapt, they die and they go extinct. So, an example of this is in this diagram, what you see is this area right here that's colored green. That is the historic range over which it seems that giant pandas lived before humans settled in the area. The red area is the current habitat for giant pandas. As human settlement has expanded, their bamboo that is their only source of nutrition has been cut down and disappeared. Their range has decreased dramatically. And so pandas have become a poster child for what habitat change can do to these specialist species and the risk they run of extinction. You'll probably hear in the news a lot about, for example, breeding programs at zoos trying to bring up the population of giant pandas worldwide, but unfortunately, they're just not fit for change because if their food source disappears, they don't eat anything else. Their digestive systems are extremely specialized to handle bamboo and get the nutrients they need out of that, even though they evolved from carnivorous bears. So there's your sad panda to kind of make you sad about what's going on.